alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Cosaanu Faydu bi, Kossy TV, Cosaanu Faydu bi.
Donc, notre deuxième thème intitulé Beyond Bilal, Cheikh Ibrahima Niass, a symbol of Islamic Renaissance on African soil, qui nous sera présenté par Moustapha Briggs. Et je rappelle que Moustapha Briggs est diplômé de London Bridge et il travaille sur ce thème Beyond Bilal et qu'il compte donc faire un livre dans une année ou plus tard deux, d'après ce qu'il vient de nous dire. So, Moustapha Briggs, you have the floor and to do your presentation on the theme Beyond Bilal, Cheikh Ibrahima Niass, a symbol of Islamic Renaissance of African soil. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم ورضي الله عن مولانا شيخنا أبو العباس أحمد التجاني وعن خليفته على الإطلاق الحاج إبراهيم نياس. الحمد لله. The theme of my speech today would be, inshallah, Beyond Bilal, Cheikh Ibrahima Niass as a symbol of Islamic Renaissance on African soil. And this is a short summary of a section of a lecture series that I've been doing touring the world, speaking about the contribution of black people and Africans to Islam. As when speaking about the history of Islam and the contributions of black people within Islam, people always like to begin and end with Bilal, radiallahu anhu, not knowing that there's a history before him and after him. And when speaking about Cheikh Ibrahima Niass in particular, we have to study his life, as he said, Hayati rumuzun kullaha wa isharatun, that his whole life are signs and symbols that should be interpreted. And the greatest sign and symbol of Cheikh Ibrahima Niass is his rise to becoming one of the most influential Islamic scholars in the past 100 years, and some may argue in the history of the Muslim world, and the role he played in the international relations of the Muslim world at his time. Usually, when we speak about the international relations of Cheikh Ibrahima Niass and his contribution to the development of the Islamic world community, we like to skip to the end of his life, towards the end of his life, the 60s and the 70s. But Cheikh Ibrahima Niass's involvement in this particular area of international relations doesn't begin in the 60s or the 70s, but it starts in his very childhood. As he said himself, وَمِنْ حَسَدٍ جَارُوا إِلَيَّ وَإِنَّنِي مُبَرِّزُ أَقْرَانٍ أَوَانُ السِّبَاءِ وَقَدْ تَمَّ فَتْحِي عِنْدَ مَهْدِي وَقَدْ أَنَتْ جَمِيعُ رِجَالِ الْغَيْبِ تَحْتَ قَضَائِهِ. So he said people were envious of him, even not without realizing that he had surpassed all of his contemporaries at the time of his youth. And we see this reflected in the fact that the first instance of him engaging in international relations and diplomacy starts with him being 11 years old. And this is when we look at the letter that was written by Al-Haji Abdullah Niass when he had to purchase the land which we now know today as Léona Niassène to establish his Zawiya after his return from Fez in the year 1911. We see that he writes a letter to Sheikh Omar Faye, who was one of his representatives in the Gambia and was a member, the first Muslim member of the Legislative Council of the Gambia, and not only that, was the person that was chosen to represent Gambia during the coronation of King George VI. Sheikh Al-Haji Abdullah Niass, the father of Cheikh Ibrahima Niass, writes a letter asking him to support him in securing funds to buy the land of Léona Niassène. So he wasn't gifted the land or given the land by the French, as many people claim, but he actually purchased the land with the help from Sheikh Omar Faye. And the letter that we see Al-Haji Abdullah Niass sent to Sheikh Omar Faye, at the end of the letter, it says, وَيُسَلِّمْ عَلَيْكُمْ مُحِبُّكُمْ كَاتِبُ الْحُرُوفِ Ibrahim ibn Al-Haji Abdullah Niass. So already Cheikh Ibrahima Niass was serving as the secretary of his father on international relations and diplomacy, sending letters from Senegal to Gambia at the age of 11. And that was a beginning or a precursor of his future that he was going to have in this realm. Continuing into his 20s, he becomes a very learned scholar. And at the age of 22, when his father passed away, he's already known within his father's house as being an intellectual and as being a sheikh. And he starts to receive ijazat from the Shurafa, the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ in the neighboring country of Mauritania. And he has visits from them, the most prominent of which that we can remember is Abdullah al-Hajj, who comes to him after his father's death and confirms to him that he will be the Sahib al-Faida, he will be the owner of the Faida that was predicted by Sheikh Ahmed Tijani Sharif. So what is interesting is that 7 years after his father's death, in the year 1929 or going into the year 1930, when he announces the Faida, he writes a book called Kashif al-Ilbas. And Kashif al-Ilbas is very important because as a symbol of Cheikh Ibrahim Niass, synchronizing the entire 1,000-year history and legacy of scholarship in Africa, this book has 217 citations from 112 different authors. And these 112 different authors are shuyukh not just from the Middle East, people like Imam Ghazali, people like Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, and all of the people who we study as the founders of the traditional Islamic sciences. But even going into the West African tradition, he quotes extensively from people like Sheikh Mukhtar al-Kunti in Mali, Muhammad Yadali al-Daymani in Mauritania, and you can see that Kashif al-Ilbas becomes a symbol and a synchronization of the 1,000-year legacy and history of Islamic scholarship throughout the Muslim world. And within that, he defends not only the Tariqa Tijaniyya specifically, but the practice of Tasawwuf generally. And so he starts to receive murids, he starts to receive disciples, not just within his country of Senegal, but in neighboring countries, Gambia and Mauritania. And the Mauritanian link and connection to the Faida is very significant due to the fact that Cheikh Ibrahim Niass comes from a tradition within Senegal who received Islam and received the Tariqa itself through interactions from North Africans and from people of Arab descent, like the Mauritanians. Even when he travels to them, you see that he says, Hayyu bani Ali bani Zahrai, asli tariqi shaykhina gharrai. He says, this is the neighborhood, or these are a group of people who are the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ through Ali ibn Abi Talib and through Fatima to Zahra. Not only that, but they are the ones who are the origin of our noble tariqah. Because we know that most of the chains that we have that trace back through the Tijani tariqah extend through the Mauritanians, through Muhammad Hafiz Shinqiti and his representatives, his three main representatives being his son, Ahmed, his other Khalifa, Baddi, and his third Khalifa, Sheikh Maulud Fall. And through them, all of the silsilat that we have today in Senegal come through them. But a time comes where the children and the grandchildren of these shurafa, the children and the grandchildren of the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ and the people who originated the tariqah and brought the tariqah now become the disciples of Cheikh Ibrahim. And this is due to the knowledge that they find within him, not just esoteric knowledge, but exoteric knowledge as well. Sheikhani, who was the great-grandson of Muhammad Hafiz, who was the one who brought the tariqah and spread the tariqah in West Africa, says to him, وَكَمْ قَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مِنْهُمْ سُؤَالًا وَكَمْ قَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ جَوَابٌ بِمَا فِي الْكُتُبِ قَدْ تَأْتِي وَتَأْتِي بِمَا لَمْ يَأْتِ قَدْ بِهِ كِتَابٌ. He said, how many times have people come to you with questions, or we've come to you with questions, and how many times have you come to us with answers for our questions? You come to us with what is in the books, and then you tell us what has never been mentioned in any book, detailing the fact that all of the external knowledge of the Sharia and the Tariqah, which they had mastered and they had studied, Cheikh Ibrahim Niass had surpassed them in that knowledge, and then he had allowed them to elevate to a further knowledge that they did not have access to, that was never written in any book before him. So a complete mastery of the Sharia, complete mastery of the Tariqah, and then complete immersion in the Haqiqah. And this was what they found with Maulana Cheikh Ibrahim Niass. And this is the first time you see that a Senegalese man having murids from all of these countries whose fathers and grandfathers were the shuyukh of their grandfathers and fathers, coming and becoming his disciples. And until today, you still see their presence within Senegal and within specifically this city of Medina Bay. If we continue on to 1937, when Cheikh Ibrahim Niass makes his first Hajj, that's the time that we see the international relations of Cheikh Ibrahim Niass surpass the bordering nations of the Gambia and Mauritania. As he meets, the most famous narrative is that he meets the Emir of Kano at the time, who becomes his murid along with members of his delegation. But something that's interesting to look at when we look at Cheikh Ibrahim Niass's travel log of his journey in 1937 to Mecca, not only does he mention his relationship with the Emir of Kano, which is in West Africa, but he mentions a group of people that came to visit him and establish relationship with him. And those relations went on to become the origin of his future international relations in the 50s and 60s. He mentions 4 people by name, and this is something that we need to study further and have further information about, because his relationship with these 4 people are very important. He mentions he was visited by Amin al-Husseini, Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini, Izzat Darwaza, Riyad al-Sulh, and Bashir Sardawi. Izzat Darwaza became one of the fathers of the Pan-Arab movement that later went on to influence people like Gamal Abdel Nasser and Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi into forming their movements and toppling the colonial powers within their countries and establishing Arab republics. He was one of the main authors of the books that inspired these people and these movements. Hajj Amin Husseini became the leader of Palestine and the Mufti of Jerusalem and the Imam of the Masjid al-Aqsa during the 50s and the 60s, at the time when the state of Israel was being established. Riyad al-Sulh went on to become the first prime minister of Lebanon, and Bashir Sardawi went on to become one of the main people that fought for the independence of Libya and the establishment of a new regime in Libya. Cheikh Ibrahima Niass met these people in 1937 and helped influence them to become the people that they were going to become in the future. And so his relationship with these 4 people, as well as the Emir of Kano, is something that needs to be further looked into. That's within the 30s and then within the 40s, and we continue to see his influence rise and rise until the 50s, where he goes through many different diplomatic relations between different countries. We see him, for example, and recent documents have been released from the Moroccan government and the Senegalese government detailing the fact that, and the French government, French archives, detailing the fact that Cheikh Ibrahima Niass was one of the only people given permission to visit Mohammed V in exile in Madagascar. And he was one of the people that helped in the negotiations that led to him come back to Morocco and be established as the King of Morocco. Not only that, but we see him within Senegal establishing a council of religious scholars in order to help defend the deen in Senegal and promote Islam in Senegal. And then in the early 60s, we see him, through his relationship with presidents like Kwame Nkrumah and Sékou Touré, extend his influence into the Arab world. So in the early 60s, we see him visit Egypt for the first time on a state visit. And he's received by the highest authority in the country, Gamal Abdel Nasser. And this is a subject that Sheikh Mansour ibn Sheikh Mamoun is going to further expand upon. But the fact that the heart of learning within the Arab world at the time, outside of 𝐐𝐞, which was Mauritania, which wasn't universally recognized at the time, the most universally recognized institute of Islamic learning was the Al-Azhar University. And Cheikh Ibrahima Niass was one of the only people who was given the honor of going there, being granted the title of Sheikh al-Islam, and being one of the only people who never studied in Al-Azhar, and especially the first West African and Black African to be given the honor of leading Salatul Jummah in Masjid al-Aqsa, in Masjid al-Azhar. He continued this relationship not only with the Egyptian government, but with the Saudi Arabian government as well, because he was invited to become the vice president of the Muslim World League and one of the 7 founding members of the Muslim World League. And this is interesting when we look at the diplomatic relations between him as a Sufi Muslim coming from West Africa, representing Africa and representing all of these nations in a majlis or in a congress that has Muslims from all different types of intellectual and philosophical strands within Islam. His influence there, through his book Subul al-Salam, helped keep the Maqam Ibrahim that we know in Mecca in its place. We also see him issuing fatwa, helping the support of reciting the Qur'an on the radio, which was something that he spread throughout West Africa. So we see that his influence throughout the 60s is traveling throughout the Arab world and throughout West Africa. But then in that same era, the late 60s, we see him also become the vice president of the Muslim World Congress in Pakistan. And this is significant because serving as the vice president of this international organization in a country like Pakistan was something that nobody had ever seen in history. And in 1964, we see him travel to China and be received by 𝐬𝐤𝐚𝐽 under the government of Chairman Mao, the communist government, at a time when Senegal had not even established diplomatic relations with China. And he did so solely based on his Islamic scholarship and solely based on his position as a religious leader, not as a political figure and not as a diplomatic figure. This is all a testament to the fact that we need to study the life of Cheikh Ibrahima Niass further, look at all of these different international relations and look at the influence that he had across the world within not just West Africa through the Faida, but also in the Arab world and in the Asian world, going even into China, which was a non-Muslim government and a communist government at the time. Somebody that had never studied anywhere except with his father, Alhaji Abdullah Niass, here in 𝐸𝐞𝐽, went on to become one of the most influential Islamic scholars in the history of the Muslim world. And we can see that through studying this, it can instill a sense of pride in us as Africans, for us to know that our place within Islam isn't limited to just ancient times, but in the most modern ages, the past 100 years, at the time when the face of the world has changed and all of the international relations of the Muslim world has changed. Cheikh Ibrahima Niass played a very, very important role in all of these missions and in everything that was happening. And it was solely based on his scholarship and his representation and all of the knowledge that he gained here in this region of 𝐸𝐽 in Senegal. So in conclusion, and a short summary, beyond Bilal, if we look past the stereotypes that we've been given, we can see Cheikh Ibrahima Niass as a model of Islamic scholarship, as a summary or a synthesis of the fact that 1,000 years of Islamic scholarship in West Africa can produce figures like Cheikh Ibrahima Niass, who can go on to influence the rest of the Muslim world in a way that had never been seen before. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.